Coding with SPARKvue.
How do I access the Blockly coding feature introduced with SPARKvue version 4.3? You can find the coding feature in the Experiment Tools under Code. Now, if you've added any code or the file already has code, you'll notice that you can directly access the code more quickly with this added code button. How do I add an else condition to an if statement in SPARKvue code? By default, under logic, we have an if statement with just a then or do branch to it. However, once you have dragged out and created the if statement, if you go to the gear, you'll notice that you can drag in either an else if or an else statement and attach it to the if. How do I create a text output from my code in SPARKvue? In this example, I'd like to output a message that indicates it's warm when the temperature measurement is over 30 degrees Celsius. To create a output text or a message, I'll go to Code Output and choose Create Text Output and give this a name. I'll call it Message. I can now drag in that whenever this condition is met, there'll be a text output message that indicates it's warm. Where can I view these messages? Well, I can view them in any SPARKvue display that accepts text, such as tables, or in this digits display from user entered data message. How can I continuously execute my code in SPARKvue? In this example, I'm going to make a temperature measurement from a sensor, compare it to a value, 30 degrees Celsius, and output a message, whether it's warm or cool. You'll notice I have some sleep statements here, but I have just a single if statement. The way the code runs is that the code will begin execution as soon as I hit start, but you'll notice that it will stop automatically. The code execution stops whenever the end of the code is reached, or when I press the stop button for recording. In this case, I might want this code to execute repeatedly as the temperature changes, and not just once. The way to do this is to nest my if loop inside a repeat loop. Under loops, I can choose to repeat a certain number of times, or if I'd like the starting and stopping of the code execution to be controlled by the start and stop buttons for recording data, I'll choose a repeat while loop. So, the contents of this repeat loop will be executed whenever there's a true statement here. Well, how can I get a true statement? Well, the easiest way to add a true statement is to just make it true. So under logic, I'm going to drag out true. So repeat while true means that whatever is inside this code will be executed continuously. So I'll nest my if and sleep statements inside that repeat. I'll hit done. And now when I hit start, I can change the temperature, and we'll notice that the code is constantly executing. That if statement is being assessed again and again, and will be until I press the stop button. How do I synchronize the output of SPARKvue code with sensor measurements? In this coding example, I'm going to be measuring the temperature from a temperature sensor, and I'd like SPARKvue's code to output a message that indicates whether this temperature is cool or warm. Notice that the sample rate for my temperature sensor, indicated here in the lower left, is 2 Hertz, or 2 samples per second. Here's my starting code. It's going to assess continuously whether the temperature is greater than or less than 30 degrees, and output a message that indicates whether it's warm or cool. Now, we saw earlier that the sensor measurement will be made twice a second, or at 2 Hertz, but this code is going to run as fast as the computer can possibly allow it. I would like to slow this down so I'm not wasting processing power, because there's no point in assessing this if do else condition any faster than the sensor measurements are made. So what I'm going to do is add a sleep into this repeating loop. Now, how long should this sleep be for? Well, this value of sleeping in milliseconds should correlate to the sample rate for your sensor. Here's how you can calculate it. If your sensor sample rate is in Hertz, as mine is at 2 Hertz, The sleep time in milliseconds should be 1,000 times 1 over the sample rate in hertz. If you have a slower sample rate and SPARKvue indicates it in seconds, then you can determine the sleep time in milliseconds as 1,000 times that sample interval in seconds. So in our code, I'm going to change this to 500 based on 2 hertz sample rate of the sensor. Now, when I go back to the output page and I press start, this code on the bottom is being updated. The output of the code, the message is being updated only as often roughly as a sensor measurement is being taken from the temperature sensor. How do I access sensor measurements inside the coding feature of SPARKvue? In this example, I'd like the code to output a message that it's warm based on a reading from a wireless temperature sensor. If I look under the hardware tray here, you'll notice that I currently have no values for sensors. That's because I don't have any sensor connected yet. So I'll go outside the code, connect my wireless temperature sensor, return to the code, and now in hardware, I'll see that I can add to my code the value of the temperature coming from that temperature sensor. In this example, I'd like to do a comparison of that temperature with a specific value. And I'll choose to output this message whenever the temperature reading is greater than 30.
Don't forget to subscribe to our social media platforms for the latest news, tutorials, products and promotions.